So you know it's not a crime to be fascinated by all things criminal. And if you do like delving into the underworld, why not join us for a special live show on March 27th at the Cork Opera House. We'll be talking about the making of a cartel and all the wild and crazy stories that happened along the way. So why not join us for this special live show? Tickets from corkpodcastfestival.ie.
So ICE, the US Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, have been the biggest story really in the world over the last couple of weeks. And we had an Irish, I suppose, angle on this when a guy called Seamus Culleton was detained by ICE, and he'd been living in America for a couple of decades. Got huge publicity actually across, not just in Ireland, but in the US as well. But now there's further details have emerged, I suppose. Like all of these things, coverage went one way, but now it has emerged that I suppose some information about his background in Ireland.
Yeah, so I suppose Seamus Culleton has been in a ICE detention centre in Texas since September last year, so 5 months. He was arrested on his way home from work. He's been living in the States since 2009. But a lot of people would know that, but what people might not know is that it's emerged that there's 2 bench warrants outstanding for Mr. Culleton. So that obviously happens when you don't appear in court to face particular charges. So what we know is that in May 2008, basically, he's accused of obstructing a Garda search by trying to discard 25 ecstasy tablets from his person during the search. So he was charged with that offence, but then he was also charged with unlawful possession of drugs for sale and supply out of the same offence, alleged offence. So that he didn't appear in court then in 2009, and I think it was April 2009. So they issued a bench warrant basically for him because he was in no-show court. And then that was again issued a bit later on in 2009 when he failed to appear on different charges. So these charges relate to 2007, and they're basically 2 criminal damage charges that is alleged to have occurred in Kilkenny. He's from Kilkenny, and these offences were before New Ross District Court, which is in Wexford.
Okay, so like if we go back to where we start with this, obviously he has been living in the US probably in or around that time. I think in his interviews he's more or less said he's been living there for 20 years at this point. Yeah,
but he seems to have gone to America in 2009, so it would be, well, not far off 20 years, sorry.
Yeah. And he was picked up obviously by ICE and is held in a detention centre. And what happened then was that it made big news in America actually because he's white. And you keep seeing these social media posts from sort of supporters of ICE saying, they're not racist. They're also deporting white people actually, which is a kind of a funny, unexpected take on it.
Yeah.
But Seamus Culleton has spoken from prison, and he's described it in really graphic terms as being something like a concentration camp.
Yeah, he has. Yeah. So he was arrested. He seems to live in Massachusetts, which is obviously on the East Coast. But when he was arrested by ICE officials on his way home from work, at that time he was taken to a centre in El Paso in Texas, and he's been held there. So yeah, he was just describing how, conditions are awful. They're like, as you said, a modern day concentration camp. He was saying that, he thought that this would be dealt with by now. Obviously, he has a lawyer who's represented him as well, and they've given interviews basically saying that the issue seems to be that when he first went to the United States in 2009, he was on a visa waiver program, which allows you to stay for 90 days. He obviously overstayed that, but then he went on to marry his American wife and was in the process of obtaining a green card. And his lawyer was actually saying that because he's been held in detention, he wasn't able to attend his interview where he would have gotten a green card. And they're also claiming that
was that his final interview?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the lawyer is also claiming that the process by which they deal with people who overstay visa programs is different. It's meant to be like you write to them and you say, giving them notice to leave the country, and they're trying to say that this is basically they're trying to allege this was basically a bit heavy-handed how he was dealt with.
Yeah, so according to his lawyer and to Seamus Culleton himself, while he he certainly breached these initial visa conditions, that he's not been living underground as such. Like, he's married to an American citizen and he had a work permit. So, the breach is a technical breach from all of those years ago. It's not as if he's been living under an assumed name.
Yeah.
So he's been held in this place, and obviously his wife as well has spoken about her devastation, and he's also described the conditions there, where he basically says only given tiny amounts of food, child-sized portions, and the toilet areas are filthy. So it's a really hardcore story.
It is, yeah.
So initially, obviously, there's huge sympathy for him within this country, but then it emerges on social media, some things about his past, and obviously we've clarified them. Now, when you talk about drug dealing charges, which he is charged with sale and supply, obviously, when you're talking about 25 ecstasy tablets, I mean, that's really at the lower end.
It is, yeah. And so it's an obstruction charge, and then also, the sale and supply. No, it is at the lower end. And I suppose it was a district court offence. The ironic thing was, if he had appeared in courts for these allegations and they were proven, they probably would have long been dealt with by now.
Yeah.
But I suppose he didn't appear according to the allegations anyway. And we don't know what will happen now. I suppose the lawyers before this emerged, the lawyers saying their concern was that he could be deported any day now. They just don't know. And he made the point that he has a steady job. He and his wife have family there. They have a company that they run, and they have a community around them. And basically, as you said, it's not a case of him living underground. And, he was trying to say that, the US government has given exemptions and forgiven kind of immigration violations when it's people that are trying to actually, live a good life. So that's their story, obviously, but it remains to be seen. We do see that a lot about outstanding bench warrants, and obviously, it is, as you said, on the minor side of things. So it's not going to be warrant, Gardaí trying to get international police forces involved and extradite somebody or anything like that. But it still is going to be there.
Yeah, it's still there now. I mean, when you talk about 25 ecstasy tablets, many people will know, but there's obviously simple possession charges, which would be, I suppose, if you're caught with, drugs that can be, judged to be for your own personal use. And a possession charge in this country, you'd almost never go to prison.
No.
Certainly very unlikely.
No.
Now, if you have 25 ecstasy tablets, you'd be pushing it to say, I suppose, that it's for personal use.
Yeah.
But obviously there are people who could have 25 ecstasy tablets for personal use, and he's charged. I mean, he hasn't been convicted of this offence.
No, he hasn't. And that's what I mean, based on how these drug offences are dealt with in the courts here, that level of offence, if he had been found guilty of it, probably would have been dealt with by way of, the district court, which is obviously the lesser.
Oh, look, you're never going to go for it. You're never going to go for prison. Now, the criminal damage, again, that could carry a range of things, but in all likelihood, it's something of a drunken nature where some damage is done to, a door or something along those lines. I don't know what it is exactly.
Yeah. But I suppose even, this has been going around on social media. Now, obviously, it's been printed by publications, including herself. But I suppose, I seem to have that, the Department of Homeland Security has responded to this case and has said, that he still did violate the terms of the visa program. So they seem to be sticking to their guns even aside from this. So I don't know how much this is going to have an impact. Yeah.
So it's a curious case because I suppose people get held up as being the perfect victim. Even more so, obviously, he's an Irishman, so it's just a straightforward story for the Irish papers.
Yeah.
But in the US, where everything is so contested, he was initially held up as this perfect victim.
Yeah.
Now that might change. But a lot of people are asking, how come the American officials don't just know about this bench warrant or these charges?
Yeah, well, I was asking that earlier because, obviously it's 2009, that's many years, that's 17 years ago. It would have been different, but, because now everything flags. And obviously we all get that, when you're going through, you can do US immigration in Dublin airports if you're flying with Aer Lingus, and when you're going through there, like you do get that fear of like, what are they going to question me about? And like, so everything flags up. So I was asking you, does that not flag up? But obviously,
well, it doesn't automatically. Everything doesn't flag up. Now, there's some changes in how the information that we share with the US government relating to people going into the country. Absolutely, but mostly there's. You constantly hear it in courts. People, judges are saying, well, if you get convicted of this, you won't be able to go to America. But traditionally, all that means is the American government have asked you on a form, have you any criminal convictions? And you just write no, and they don't check it up.
They don't check it up?
No, I mean, there's data protection, and, they're not obliged to go. I think if they make a specific request about Eimear Rabbitt, then the Irish government will probably tell them the information, but they can't just put your name into the Irish system.
So I thought it would flag. So it doesn't flag on your passport if you have it. Well, obviously this man, so Seamus Culleton, wouldn't have a conviction because he wasn't convicted of it. But if he did, I thought it would flag.
But certainly not back in 2009.
Yeah.
I mean, you still have, the American government still have to request information, and that has to be accepted. We are maybe lapdogs, but we're still a sovereign state to the US.
Okay. All right. Okay.
I mean, I suppose the broader question is, this is, roughly 20 years ago, a bit less than 20 years ago. Is it unfair on the guy that this is brought up? I mean, it's certainly harsh on him, I think, because I think it has been said by him and by his family that he's lived a blameless life in the US. Yeah,
well, they said that he has no criminal record, and I suppose that is even, that is true because these allegations weren't proven. But he did still abscond from court, I suppose. But I do think in general, I suppose if you're charged with something, I do think that you should have to appear and you have to let the process run its course. But at the same time, like if you look at these cases and, we obviously focus in on the Irish ones, like I do think, the way these people are being held and the conditions that they're in is pretty bad. Like we've seen that Irish woman who was released, she was released towards the end of the last year. She was also held, I don't know if it was Texas, she was held in a centre as well near there, and she was basically saying that like there was like bugs all over the walls, that there wasn't actually set up to be a nice detention centre at that time, and that the place smelled so bad, the sanitary conditions are really bad. So like, God, you do think like these people, fair enough, he did overstay his visa, but like, there's a history of that with Irish people, isn't there, going back? How many people have we heard that went to the States and just never came back? So, they definitely don't deserve that treatment, in my opinion.
No, well, everything is, in the modern world, when it comes to immigration in the US, everything is contested, and every reality has a couple of different opinions. But we'll come back when we hear more developments on this case.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Eimear.
Thanks, Niall.
If you're a crimeworld.com subscriber, you've probably already binged on our latest exclusive podcast series, The Regency 10 Years On, from the hit that changed gangland forever. This 6-part anniversary special revisits that fateful day when David Byrne was shot dead at the Northside Hotel, igniting a bloody feud between the Kinahan and Hutch gangs, one of the deadliest rivalries in Irish history. Here's a taste of the new series, exclusive to crimeworld.com subscribers. So that Friday was one of those really quiet days. I mean, we all knew that Daniel Kinahan was in Dublin for the Clash of the Clans boxing weigh-in. At least we knew he was due into Dublin the next day. That Clash of the Clans bout match had been heavily advertised. But the day itself there was just little going on.
So there was very little happening that day. It's February. It's kind of a quiet enough time for news in general. And Alan Cherry and Ernie Leslie were on the road. They were at another story actually in Finglas.
What was that, do you remember?
Well, it was one of these classic sort of district court stories where a guy I think some teenagers had thrown stones at his car and he got out and slapped the teenager. Always great kind of human stories because some people feel sorry for the teenagers and some people don't. And so Alan had been out there. But the guy had moved on. He'd called out to his house to see if he wanted to talk. He'd moved on. He wasn't there. And we discussed going to the Regency earlier. And I said, look, just go along and see what happens. Divert there. We obviously weren't expecting anything. And obviously that point of Alan being there would be the subject of conspiracy, but we'll get into that at a later point.
For sure. So it was a case really that day of, one thing hadn't worked out, so go to the next. But also there was definitely a general sense of, if we could be there, just in case.
Yes, and as you said, to see who was standing beside the Kinahans and who wasn't from that bigger organised crime group. So Alan and Ernie went out. I got a call. I think you got a call almost simultaneously, but I got a call from Alan. I'd spoken to him earlier on the day saying, see what happens. And he phoned me up and said, there's after been a shooting and I think we've got a picture. And I actually went, yeah, very funny. But of course, he stopped me and said, no, I'm serious. We're after, there's some guys come out with a gun, there's shots fired, and there's total and utter chaos. And, our first thought is, get yourself safe. I have to admit, my second thought was, I hope they did get good pictures. But, you're still thinking they have to get safe. I mean, I know you probably got a similar call because Ernie and Alan obviously were in the same Jeep.
And of course, Ernie's the guy taking the photographs,
yes.
So he's on the phone to me. So I actually had gone for a pizza for lunch and I had come back over to the office and the phone rings and it was Ernie. And I answered and he was panicked on the other end of the phone. This was real high octane stuff. And he's still trying to take photos. He's trying to tell me what's happened. He's told me he thinks he's got a good one of one of the shooters as they were running from the scene. He was trying to call up the photograph on the back of his camera.
Yeah.
Because it would have taken him a while to get it onto a screen, but he'd also sent it into the office.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So he was kind of in the middle of doing a number of things. And as I was on the phone to him from memory, the photograph came into the office and we put it up on the big screen. And it was clear to see that this wasn't just one of the shooters as he suspected, but it was two. One of them was dressed as a woman.
Which is, of course, there was also this confusing story about guards coming in with weapons, and obviously we know now that they weren't ERU guys, they were guys dressed as them. But Alan was telling me this, there was talk of these guards, and then obviously there was, the crowd fleeing from the scene. So it was all confusing. But as you said, Ernie had taken a picture of the back of his camera. People will know what the photographer's cameras look like, and they have a little digital screen. So you don't see it in great detail. But we knew this is a once-in-a-lifetime photograph has been gotten.
Yeah, as soon as it came in. And of course, look, the newsrooms aren't as busy as they used to be. They used to be very busy, buzzy places with phones ringing everywhere. And it felt like a proper newsroom that day. I remember everybody's phone was going. People were hearing little bits about it. The news was starting to break about it. And of course, we were there sitting in the office with this photo. There's that sort of news sense in you that you want to run this.
Yeah.
And at the time, we weren't putting stuff up online. This would have been held for the paper on the Sunday, and this is a Friday afternoon. We had something really special here. But we also, I think, knew the guards were going to be desperate for that picture because they were two gunmen running from a scene of a crime. So it was a very compromised situation, and there was a bit of arguments going on, and there was voices were raised.
Totally. I mean, because it is complex. I mean, normally the journalism likes to keep itself separate from the Gardaí investigations. So Garda investigations go on and journalism reports on them. But obviously then you're put in this compromising position because you have guys running out visibly with handguns in their hands. And, they're obviously then disappeared into the ether. And you have to have a discussion about what is your civic responsibility in terms of, do you help the guards? You don't want these armed gunmen to run down the street and kill another few people. So it was a complex one, and people were aware straight away that the guards are going to want these pictures and want to use it for their purposes. And we also have our purposes, which is to tell what happened and to report on the news. So there was a conflict straight away.
From my memory, as the afternoon went on and, I was talking to contacts and to other people who were involved in crime journalism, etc., it became apparent that there were no guards at the weigh-in. That in actual fact, the guards didn't seem to be there at all. They were called literally by the hotel and had arrived in response to what had already gone on. Of course, David Byrne had been shot dead in the reception of the hotel. We were getting photographs in later in the day, which showed a very shocked-looking Liam Byrne standing outside the hotel, his hands in his pockets, standing beside his cousin Liam Rowe, another significant cartel member. There was no sign of Daniel Kinahan. I was getting calls from people who were telling me that these professional killers had been flown into the country and had already been flown out. There was rumours, there was spin, and also there was the general, I suppose, conversations in regards to, oh my God, what is going to happen next? I mean, all anyone knew for sure was something was going to happen. David Byrne was a very, very senior lieutenant. He was also from criminal royalty from the Byrne family. His brother-in-law is Thomas Bomber Kavanagh. His brother is Liam Byrne, and he's very much at the heart of the Kinahan cartel. We knew from the beginning that this attack had occurred as part of the rivalry between the Kinahan and Hutch factions of what was once the one organisation. And I think everybody was really trying to predict what this might lead to, but nobody could have guessed.
Nobody could have guessed. And of course, those rumours straight away went around. It was straight away focused on the Hutch gang. But at this time, if you remember, while there had been other incidents, for example, an attempted hit on Jerry Hutch in Lanzarote, it wasn't, those incidents weren't always public. People were straight away thinking this isn't the type of normal organised crime operation. They were looking at the weapons, saying, is there a paramilitary organisation involved here? Nobody knew fully. And of course, what people did fear straight away was, no matter what, people knew how big and how powerful the Kinahans had become, and the likelihood of them not striking back was inevitable. That blood was going to flow.
That bit absolutely 100%. But at that very early stage, I recall contacts of mine suggesting that the Hutches were an army. Did they have the backing of the dissidents? Was this going to, were they going to be very heavily armed because of that? They had contacts in the north. It was like as if people were trying to size up how two Premiership teams were going to play against one another. That's what it felt like. You've been listening to an extract from the Regency, 10 years on from the hit that changed gangland forever. Visit crimeworld.com and subscribe to hear the full series now. And you'll also get exclusive access to our other podcast deep dives on the Dapper Don, Christy Kinahan, Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, and more.